Episode 3 begins with a random blimp that happens to be patrolling around the city, starts to crash, and one of the pilots almost falls out from the gaping hole left in it, and Superman comes to save him, as well as save the people down on the streets who are almost hit with the large metal beam that fell from the airship. And Superman gently puts the pilot down and ignores Lois, who is, still trying to get her 60 minutes or her 60 seconds of fame with Superman, to pretty much no avail whatsoever. Elsewhere in a prison, a couple of guys are breaking through security, trying to find another prisoner, and they don't seem too competent of criminals, as one of the bigger of the two keeps, using their real names, which is not something you really want to do when you're a masked villain, so to speak. But they are able to find the prisoner they're looking for, who seems to be either one of their sister or both their sister, and they're this kind of adopted family almost. But they break her out and give her some technology just like they were given, which is likely tech from Livewire, as it's got a similar design, with the girl's little piece of tech being a almost skull-like mask that amplifies sound, and it, sends shock waves of sound that would probably either knock you out or really, really hurt your brain. And of course, if you have read some DC stuff here and there, you could probably guess that this is supposed to be Banshee, who I guess is a Superman villain. I'm not too sure. I've seen her in some Justice League stuff here and there, but that's pretty much it. And then the other two, I'm not too sure if they're supposed to be established villains either. At the Daily Planet, Lois is kind of walking around, being a little peeved that she couldn't get her interview with Superman, while Clark is walking in the opposite direction that she is, holding a cup of coffee and about to, bring it to her, when his eyes start sort of flickering a little bit of red, and he feels really disorientated and accidentally knocks into Lois. That whole thing is, kind of just settled over when he, gives her the coffee, which is apparently her favorite place, which is on the other side of the city. But he, just passes off, being like, I was jogging a long, long way, basically. At their unofficial office, both Clark, Lois, or all Lois, Clark, and Jimmy are trying to, yet again, figure out what their next big, feint is going to be, especially involving Superman, seeing how that's probably their best bet to being journalists that are taken seriously. While brainstorming, in come in some of the more professional, quote professional people at the Daily Planet, that being a regular news person, a sportscaster, and I think just a regular investigative journalist. I forgot what the third one said, but at least the first two of them have almost a Team Rocket sort of introduction, in a very Team Rocket sort of way they speak and introduce themselves. It's definitely the very cartoony and anime part that the show occasionally embraces, and it's definitely kind of funny. But they come in basically saying that they're pretty much going to just take credit on most of the Superman stuff, and whatever they find, which Lois does not at all like, but that's the sad reality of being an intern in a job like that. Hearing about the whole prison break-in, Lois brings the other two with her to, go check out the place and then interview the warden and maybe some other people inside about the thing. And Clark, of course, is like, hey, we don't really have any grounds to set up an interview or anything, so, we're not professionals. But then Lois, reveals that she was able to sneakily steal the badges or lanyard tags belonging to the, free professional people who had the Team Rocket entrance. And they try to, basically pretend to be them while, talking to the warden, which goes about as well as you'd think. So they try to just bail, even though that's not a good idea either, and hide from security as they try to find them and escort them out and all that. While hiding, Lois, Clark, and Jimmy end up finding Banshee's cell where there's like a big, hole through the inside of it, so they're able to get out while also gathering some clues. With what they found, they discovered that the three kind of amateur crooks are planning on making a really big bust, and Clark adds to this by deducing that they're going to hit the biggest, bank in Metropolis. So they try to get there in time before anything bad happens, and while they are, across from the bank, Lois decides to come up with a plan of putting herself and likely Jimmy in danger just so Superman will, save them and they can get that interview. And Clark is, of course, not too jazzed about that, but, he's ready to, quote, call the police while the bust is happening at the bank. And of course, just like she said, Lois is trying to get in some danger alongside Jimmy. And of course, that's when, Superman comes in. Established in a cutaway scene a bit earlier, the crooks ended up procuring a giant sort of freeze ray. It's nothing that you can, kind of pick up and use as a gun, kind of like Mr. Freeze or Captain Cold would use, but instead sort of a thing you would prop up on a road vehicle if this was some sort of military situation. Basically it's just a stationary freeze ray meant to, I guess, freeze the vault door so they can open it and get all that cash. But while fighting with Superman, the freeze ray starts to sort of jam up and start freezing everything in the vicinity, and the ice starts spreading outside of the bank and freezing people. And with this, Lois and Jimmy, try to get people out of the way, get them to safety, and Superman kind of gets frozen alongside the crooks, but he's able to break free, and yet again his red eyes kind of start flickering a bit, just like earlier. Through concentration, Clark is able to use these, red eyes to shoot heat lasers, very hot lasers out of his eyes, to then, unthaw everything and also destroy the machine and pretty much save the day. While Superman is looking around, making sure everyone's alright, and as the, EMTs come in, we briefly see that one of the EMTs is actually Deathstroke in disguise, likely ready to take both, well, most likely just Banshee away to be another member of Task Force X. While outside, the crowds just start pouring in, trying to, get a look at Superman, as well as some of the news people. And Lois, of course, yet again tries to get her interview, with this time Superman deciding to actually give in, grabs her, and flies away with her until they make it to the rooftop of the Daily Planet. There, Lois is finally able to get that interview, and not a lot of, answers are given, because Clark doesn't even know, like, who he truly is or where he's from at this point in time. He's not always sure about his powers. Like, he obviously just then discovered his heat vision, so obviously there's a lot to still figure out. But even then, he does reveal to Lois why he decided to, humor her then, which is because she was going out of her way to help people in the face of danger, and he kind of respects her for that. So even, without too much info given, Superman just flies away, and Clark as himself comes up, pretending to be exhausted from running up there, and asking, how the interview went, and being, pretend surprised that she finally got it. But Lois is, smirking, saying that Superman is a liar, and Clark, humorously is just like, what? And that was episode 3. Pretty good, honestly. Like the other 2 episodes, they're, short, like over 20 minutes, which makes sense for a show technically aimed at kids. Short and sweet. But it does a good deal with its time. Of course, it's cool to see yet another classic villain be sort of revamped and, built up at this, point, sort of like how Superman is sort of started already. It'll be interesting to see how all of these, villains are set up and come together in Task Force X, led by Amanda Waller and all of that. That will be interesting to see. And I do wonder if, characters like Slade Wilson will really come into their own with him being like full Deathstroke. Just like the last 2 episodes, the animation is really good, and so is the voice acting, all of those little things. Also, like before, the relationship between Clark and Lois is really nice. Their chemistry does still work, and there's a really, I guess, adorkable sort of quality to it all, which, shined more in the first 2 before, but it still shines a bit here and will continue to do so, from what I can guess. While it's not much to talk about, episode 3 finally introduces an actual opening intro for the show, which is simple. It's like maybe over 30 seconds. Doesn't have any like song really, and it's just like a brief summary of, the idea of the show. There's Clark, there's Lois, there's Jimmy, there's the looming presence of Clark's Kryptonian heritage, and then there's also the looming threat of all of these established villains and then the upcoming villains. And it does remind me a bit of, shows like She-Ra, which was the Netflix one, and Netflix's Voltron, which the animation style does remind me of quite a bit. I'm not sure if it's the same people, but maybe the people who worked on this were a bit inspired, maybe. Overall, I still think this show is going strong so far, and I really have high hopes for, future episodes and what the writers and the animators can really bring to the table. And I didn't bring it up too much last review, but I'm not the biggest Superman fan, but I like when he's, represented in a, really good light, and not just either he's overpowered or he's just kind of dunked on. This really does bring some of that positivity back to the character, and will hopefully make, newcomers, people of a new generation, really like this character. And I'm sure James Gunn's Superman Legacy might also bring in some of that to Superman. But, that's all for us to figure out later, or for us to see later, I guess. I'm gonna give episode 3 an 8 out of 10, about as good as the last two. I hope you enjoyed this new review. Hope you stay tuned for more. Maybe check out some of my other videos, possibly subscribe, which would be really nice, and I'd appreciate it. Other than that, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.